So this is Kareena Zerefos. Kareena is a Greek-Australian artist based in Lisbon, Portugal. She has a background in design and illustration and graduated with a Master of Art from the University of New South Wales in 2017. So Kareena, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
And I think you are speaking to us today from your studio.
I am, yes.
And can you tell us like do you usually make art in the studio?
It's actually a recent move. So I, for the last few years, was actually making art from my lounge room and sharing that space with my daughter and dog and partner and the rest of my life. And finally, in the summertime, I moved into a shared studio space in a village quite close to our home. And it's just so nice to be able to leave work out and not be worried about sticky hands or anything falling down. So yeah, I am full-time in the studio now, which is lovely.
So aside from those practicalities of having, a kid with sticky hands and a dog running around, in terms of protecting your work, like is it also important for you to have a dedicated space for your creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I adapted pretty well through early motherhood stages, but previously to that, I always like to have a space to go to, like to have that sense of, I don't know, it's almost like a ritual when you enter into the studio space and everything is there and you can kind of feel that energy that's not tampered with by everything else that's going on in life. So I do think it's not necessary because I've worked in all kinds of scenarios. Like I've worked on a kitchen bench in a studio apartment. I've worked against wardrobes. I've worked against anything I could find depending on my life situation. But there is something very, what's the word I'm looking for? It almost like feels like a sacred space when you have a separate studio.
So yeah, in terms of the ritual, is there something ritualistic about the way that you enter the studio, or is it just a feeling?
It's just a feeling. It's just a
Yeah.
feeling. I think especially after having not had a studio for a few years, just that sense of this is my space is enough now for me to feel that way. In the past, I suppose I was probably a little bit more Virgo about it, where it would be more like I would enter a space and I would have to instantly tidy or rearrange or put on certain music or make a coffee. Whereas now there's just such a sense of enthusiasm coming in here that it automatically shifts. It's like the door of the studio is the threshold. Yeah, in saying that I do always stop on the way for a coffee.
And do you feel the same sense of entering a sacred space when you enter places where art is displayed, like galleries or museums?
Yeah, definitely. Like I think I often refer to sort of when I walk into a art museum or a gallery that I'm going to church. And there's definitely a sense of that same feeling where it's like you're entering into this space where there's so much energy from all the artists exhibited, from all of the contexts and the historical background of even the architecture of the space, that I feel maybe the studio is less like church, but the gallery space when I walk into a gallery definitely for me feels like I'm entering into a sacred place.
Is there for you like a most sacred memory of communing with art?
I think my
Anything that
earliest one,
stands
and
out?
no, I know, but this is like quite clear for me because the first time I went to the Tate and I went to the Rothko Room, and it's probably a real, like I was 15, 16, and at that point I already knew I wanted to be an artist from a very young age, but at that point I just remember being like, you could feel the vibration, the resonance, the energy was so strong. And I remember just sitting in there as this like young teenager, just being like, this is incredible that this is possible.
That's funny. That is actually probably up there with mine as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
for viewers who or listeners who aren't clear, that's the Rothko Room in the Tate Modern in London. And yeah, likewise. I mean, I think I first went there when I was a student, and I
Mhm.
just stood in front of that painting for yeah a long time, and yeah probably got very moved.
Yeah.
Um, and you and I were talking the other day when we met for coffee about the importance of like physical originals of art, and that's a very interesting example because do you think people would have the same kind of spiritual or transcendent experience looking at a Rothko reproduction versus that original that is there?
Yeah, well, this is what I haven't read the full study yet, but there was a study that's just come out about this, that they at King's College London did a test or some research into the actual physiological response that we have when entering a gallery space and looking at work. And apparently, when looking at reproductions of the work, the same physiological reaction does not happen, which I find super fascinating. I mean, as an artist, I feel like we already know this. This is why we do what we do, and this is why we feel so strongly compelled and connected to our own work and the work of others. But must be, and I need to read the full thing to see if they tap into this or not. But there must be some sort of deeper energetic exchange that is happening with the work that's been created, that everything that the artist is bringing into it, their experience, their emotions, their spiritual being, all the rest of it that's coming through, I feel like must be in the work. The
So do you
materials
think,
themselves even.
yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it matters that Rothko touched that paint and that canvas, and in some ways his energy or the things that he was experiencing and feeling have been transmitted through it?
I feel like, I mean, I'm very spiritual about how I think about art, and I feel like if he was channeling something greater than himself into the work in that process through his human vessel, then absolutely. Whether it is he was the only person that could come through is another thing. But I feel like, yeah, it has to be. I mean, I do think there's, in terms of his use of color and the actual pigment of the paint, there's so many layers of how that also can come to being, I guess, in terms of, paint being made from the earth, the different minerals and everything that's involved. Like, I feel like there's maybe a lot to it, but I don't know. This is where I find the intersection of science and art quite interesting. It's like, well, you could really go into that from a physical perspective, but then also from like an energetic perspective.
Does that influence then your choice of materials for your own work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in the past, not so much at the moment necessarily, but in the past I was working a lot with copper. Through my master's, I was working with copper, doing what I was calling copper paintings. And I was working purely with sort of alchemical, chemical processes. And I was just really drawn to that material as kind of a symbol and, I guess, material of the feminine. It's kind of, even from a practical level, we use it as a connector in energy and electricity. So for me, the material definitely has, in some points in my practice, had a massive influence and been a part of that. At the moment, it's more in the practice of drawing itself. I've recently shifted. I work in colored pencil on paper a lot of the time, but now the last year I've been experimenting with oil sticks on linen. And it's not so much the oil that I actually was trying to avoid working with oil for such a long time, but I love the way that it feels like crayons on a wall, like a child. Like there's something about that immediate kind of innocent and uninhibited like feeling that you get from working with crayons that comes through in the material as well.
And why were you trying to avoid working with oil for?
I think as a female artist, I really wanted to kind of be there's this assumption that it's like, to be a serious artist, you work with oils, you work on canvas. Like that's kind of the institutional standard of what art is. And as a female artist, I felt like, well, I want to work in materials that are connected to women's work, that were kind of seen as like in the art historical, like it's kind of lesser than to work in watercolors. You know, drawing wasn't taken very seriously. And I think there was a part of me that wanted to rebel against like not working in oils as like a, let's actually just give these other materials the importance that they deserve, and you know, stop separating them from serious art. So I think it was a little bit of a rebellion. I'm kind of trying to let that go and reprogram some of this stuff because I think we're moving past that. But yeah, it was a strong aversion. And then I guess also there was the practical side. For a while, early motherhood, working in the home, I didn't want oils and chemicals and these sort of things in the space. It's really strong.
And can you say more about what you mean by copper as a female element? I can't quite remember what terminology you use, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Oh my God, I have to go back into my brain from quite a few years ago. But I mean, I tend to always look into things from like a symbolism perspective. And in the practical world, we've used copper for roofing, we've used copper for wiring. And I see those things as being in the feminine, like a representation of the feminine, because we are sort of contained and nurtured by women, or the feminine archetype. And we often, connection and communication is through the feminine. So from that perspective, that's how I sort of understood it. But then I think also in terms of alchemy and symbolism, there is some connection between copper as an element and the divine feminine. But I would have to go through my sketchbooks to figure out what I was on about at the time. But that is, why I had gone down that rabbit hole. I was kind of creating, I guess, talismans that were these really small copper pieces, and working with materials that you could kind of find in the home, like sulfur and ammonia, like things that kind of you might have in cleaning supplies. I was using vinegar, working those up and kind of being in this process that was like a dialogue with the materials. So I didn't have much control. It wasn't like I was drawing directly on the material or using it as a plate for etching. It was basically like playing, drawing, painting with the different chemicals, letting it sit in vessels, letting it do its own thing, and then coming back and responding to that. And it was this very lengthy process of sort of being open to what was naturally happening, but then also it was very experimental, I suppose, like very much just responding and being sort of surrendered to the fact that even if I did something and I was happy with what I'd done, I would then have to let it take its part in the conversation and see how it's responding. And sometimes I would lose something I'd be attached to, and I'd have to sort of work through that. It was a very cathartic and freeing process where I was kind of trying to let go of my perfectionist Virgo tendencies and actually, I guess, co-create.
And was that also something that the nature of copper helped you with, in the sense that copper corrodes quite quickly and gets that verdigris
Absolutely.
sheen?
Absolutely. So yeah, it was interesting because copper, at the time I was sharing a studio with a metalsmith, so she taught me quite a lot about what would happen if I tried different things and different ways to play with it. And copper is amazing because you can create so many different colors without, like it creates so many different colors. So you can get these super vibrant blues and greens and actual dusty rust colors, and even purples and things like this would come out of it. So yeah, definitely copper from a play perspective. It's a lot faster than other materials in terms of how it reacts to the environment.
I was writing a piece last week about the Statue of Liberty. And I kind of always, I suppose, had a vague awareness that she was made out of copper, but it was never quite clear. And I started to really get into this relationship of like, they built this statue, the most famous copper object in the world, that they knew within 15 years was going to turn green.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, I was looking at like kind of recreations of the original color, and somehow the green, it does seem more beautiful, you know, the corroded version.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how copper responds, and I love the greens that come out of it. It's amazing.
Really cool. And so, you know, do you like have a routine for making art? Do you make art every day? Is it a structured program for you?
No, I'm a very unstructured person, so definitely not. I always try to put things into my practice. I always try and be like, okay, I'm going to have like a calendar reminder that's a drop everything and draw. Like I've wanted to do that my whole life. I think I've done it once. One day it worked, and then the rest of the time it doesn't work. My art practice is very based on compulsion. So when I feel like I have to do something or something is just asking to be done, then I tend to get a bit obsessive and go straight into that zone. I mean, it's a bit impractical as a mother and someone that also works as a freelancer in other creative practices, that it can't always be possible, but I very much try to work with my natural energy. And this year's the first year I've really noticed that I have like quite a cyclical relationship with my practice. Like it's very much seasonal. I tend to work a lot more obsessively when it's cold and when it's winter, and I guess when I'm spending more time inside. And yeah, I don't have much consistency in terms of, I'd like to be one of those people that actually, you know, knows that for 4 hours between these times I'm going to really be dedicated. And in the past I have, like when I was doing my master's or when I was not juggling as many parts of my life, I would be a bit more dedicated to being in that dialogue with my work more often. But now it's very much when I'm inspired, it comes through. And if I can't get into the studio to do the thing that I want to do immediately, I'll always just journal and sketch out what I'm wanting to bring in.
And do you, that sort of compulsion or that energy that comes up to create, do you find that you have any reliable ways to stoke it or stimulate it, or it's not within your control?
I mean, I have got a pretty solid journaling practice, which I suppose keeps it like front of mind. So I do the whole morning pages thing, and especially in the stages of motherhood where I haven't had the flexibility of time and space, I've found that journaling has been the main way to keep that resource going. And so I'll often be able to cultivate it by returning to ideas that I've sketched, or like I call it like my car park of ideas. So I'll sometimes go in there when I'm feeling a bit like, okay, I need to bring something up. But I do tend to find that the work that is pure compulsion, like that it's like I really need to do this and I don't know why, but it needs to have this feeling and form, then, or even just like I have an urgency to start experimenting with something, then that tends to come out in a more authentic and flowing way than if I sort of sit down and I'm like, okay, you have to create a work about this thing right now.
And can you explain for those who don't know what morning pages is?
Yeah. Morning pages, it's a concept by Julia Cameron from The Artist Way. and and she basically suggests that every morning you do free form writing, 3 pages in a journal, handwritten, and you just brain dump. You're not meant to think about what you're going to write. You just start writing and let it come out. And it's extremely cathartic, like, you know, whenever you're having harder times or anything's going on, or even if you don't know that you've got something going on, it will come out onto those pages. And what I often find is the first page will just be like a brain dump of all my anxieties and stress and anything that's percolated through the night. And then the next 2 pages, all of the ideas start coming, or the, you know, little connections that you didn't see in your mind before, like, will just start surfacing.
So do you do that every day as a discipline?
I try. I really try. It's probably a TMI situation, but I keep my morning pages journal in the bathroom because that's my like escape in the morning. My daughter's like, "Why are you still in the bathroom?" Just journaling. So I find, it works better when I do it every day. And I often will have these big gaps, and usually when there's a big gap, I'm trying to avoid something that I know that I don't want to have to deal with.
And so, you know, you also write a Substack where you talk about your art, and I'm curious about that relationship for you between writing and visual art, because for me as a writer, I can see the one-to-one relationship. If I'm writing something in a notebook, it's often going to go directly into what I'm actually doing. But for you, can you describe that relationship for yourself?
Yeah, it's quite strange because I always, and this is something else that Julia Cameron talks about in that book, I was always the one that would draw. My sister was the one that would write. And I, even though I would always write kind of the equivalent of morning pages intuitively as a child, I would do like what I would call letters. I didn't keep a diary. I would write letters to different people that I never sent. So I've always had writing in my practice, and actually my art journals have never really been that much in the way of drawing. I always write my ideas, and then I might do a sketch, but they're very naive. So for me, there's always been this connection. It's just been the last maybe 2 years that I've started to actually not be afraid of using writing as a form of like communication or channeling. But yeah, that definitely, like I remember before I started officially doing morning pages thinking, okay, like this is very much for a writer's practice, but it still very much helps the other aspects of my creative practice. Like it doesn't seem to, I guess as long as you're not holding on to the fact that, okay, this isn't written perfectly and you would never be able to publish anything that's written directly. But it still has that same process of like pulling things out of your subconscious, that whether it's written or drawn doesn't really make a difference to me.
And so, you know, you excuse me, you say that when you write, you're often writing your ideas. So I'm curious about how that looks in terms of your process. Do you know something of what a painting or an illustration is going to be or look like, or what the ideas in it are going to be like when you begin, and then there's a degree of discovery, or what's the balance there?
It's interesting. I mean, I tend to mind map ideas, and I seem to go around similar themes all the time. And even when I think that I'm disconnecting from it, I tend to circle back into Greek mythology and some level of spiritualism. And there's like my journals tend to be mind maps of words and thoughts and little phrases or something I've seen, from art historical or from mythology or some sort of story that will come in. And then I tend to, it depends on which part of my practice, but in my practice now, I'm in the same way that I was playing with the copper. I started playing with drawing as a medium. I started playing with things like looking at spiritual architecture. I started looking at AI and having this kind of connection between all of these things as part of that dialogue of ideas and connecting them back into each other, and kind of having one part of my process that's disconnected from my own control, which is a combination of the drawing practice and AI, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about that, the combination of the drawing practice and AI.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not, I'm mostly just in the drawing practice now, but early on, like it must have been 2023. I've got to remember the platform name. I was playing with a platform called Duya or something like that. I think it's called exactly AI now, where basically you train your own AI model with your own imagery. So you feed it in your own drawings or sketches or whatever you want, and then train it based on like what you want to reproduce from that. And so I started doing this back and forward process where I would feed in things, it would spit out things, they would be super weird. But then I kind of really like that really weird, unexpected, kind of eerie feeling. So I would then bring that back in, and then I do things like create collages and sketch other things. And I don't know, it becomes this kind of play in the same way that I was talking about the copper, where I'd sort of respond to whatever was happening with the chemicals. I sort of respond to what the AI was giving back. And so I'm doing this less directly now. I'm not actually using AI at all in my practice now, but it kind of set me on this journey of trying to create that in the drawing practice itself. So now the part I'm doing now, which is kind of playful, is I'll use things like my daughter's hula hoop and some dishes or whatever I have lying around to get forms and shapes, and I'll just start sketching out. Like you can kind of, I don't know if you can see this behind me, but like I kind of start like just doing basic line work and not trying to overthink it, just kind of sketch it straight onto the canvas and let things kind of come while I'm looking at it. And then the fun thing about working with oil is it takes so long to dry, especially in this really humid climate, that I leave that for a few days, a few weeks, and return to it, and then something else sort of comes forward, and then I work with that. And it just kind of evolves in its own slow way. But I feel like with drawing itself as practice, it has that kind of combination of really spontaneous and free, but it can also be super meticulous. And I lean towards the meticulous. I want to control everything most of the time. So when I have this space to let it be more spontaneous, it tends to have this nice, eerie, as I say, combination between subconscious and conscious.
And is that what the AI program gave you? Is the kind of like randomness something that you couldn't control that was
100%.
there for you?
Yeah,
And
100%. I found it super fascinating as a tool to sort of just, I guess when you're working solo, like you're not in dialogue, you're not in an institution like at university where you can get that feedback from other people, it became kind of this really playful way of being like, oh, I would never see it like that. And sometimes it would be more the fact that it would give you something so ridiculous that you'd then come up with another tangent. It doesn't always have to be something you like for it to inspire something.
And what do you mean by it had this eerie feeling?
I guess I'm really interested in that. I don't know, I've always been interested in this tension between polarities or dualities. And I guess there's something about what AI produces that is so close. Like it's so real, but you know it's off. Like it's almost like it's either too perfect or the lighting feels unnatural or something about it is always that eerie thing. And I'm sure as it gets better and it's trained more, that's going to get so perfect we can't tell the difference. But there's that sense of this kind of like artificial world that it's created that I find, yeah, that sense is interesting to me.
And how does that relate to your feeling that art is a spiritual thing? Because in a way, it brings me back to this, study you were citing about the reproductions versus the original, and you know, this sense of like, is there a soul in the reproduction, or is there a soul in the perfect AI reproduction of something? Will, even if it's more perfect than the original, will there ever be? Will there always be that sense of eeriness of, you know, the spiritual part of us feels like
Disconnection from, yeah,
something's not there, you know.
absolutely. I think so. I think as, you know, sensitive soul-based beings, we're always going to feel that disconnect. We're not going to feel the same resonance from a work that has been created by AI completely. I think we are always going to crave that human soul connection, whatever form it's in. Doesn't matter how visually or even in writing, like how it doesn't matter how much it can mimic and be exactly the same in terms of what you perceive on the outside. I think we're always going to be craving that deeper connection, that soul connection with work.
And so, you know, we've spoken about the relationship for you between what you write and then the visual art. I also wonder, do you like talking about your art, or do you think the art should speak for itself?
Yeah, it's a really tricky balance. I was doing this online course with Contemporary Art Academy where we were sort of going deeper into how to talk about your work and that sort of thing. And I really enjoy unpacking ideas, and I always know what my themes are. I always work from a very conceptual basis with my work. It's not visual first, or if it is visual first, it's usually telling me something and then I become aware of it as I go. But I think there's a balance. For me, I personally, when people are engaging with my work, I prefer them to have their own experience and response, because otherwise I'm very much projecting what I feel when I created the work or what I see in the work once it's done. And often I find people have a very different response. Like, I call my work eerie. When I exhibited last year in London for the Other Art Fair, I was getting direct feedback that it felt really calm. And I thought it was just fascinating that what we perceive in the work, and I guess my energy when creating it maybe was calm, so they receive that, whereas, I don't know, I'm putting all my limiting beliefs onto it and projecting all these other things that were going on in my life. So I don't know, I prefer people to just engage with it and get what they want out of it, and maybe give someone a little bit of a hint or a clue as to what it's about, but then let them also create their own meaning.
It's funny because I often kind of feel like really good art sort of combines two incompatible things at the same time, like eeriness and calmness existing alongside each other. It's like, do you ever hear that quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is like, the measure of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time and still retain the ability to function.
Yeah, I love that.
And I always think like that's the art that I really love holds two contradictory ideas at the same time, and we still retain the ability to function while we look at it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love that, because it's very much like, if you think about how things are going in terms of social media and the whole people being very much put into identity, kind of polarized identity buckets, I guess. I'm going to call them buckets. I think we're getting less, it's like we're losing that ability to hold multiple truths at the same time. Even if we don't necessarily agree with all those truths, it's like having that ability to, or the capacity to hold contradiction in itself, because we are human, and that is like innately part of us, is to be able to see those subtleties and be in the gray area. And I feel like we're kind of being so pushed into, you either believe this and listen to these people, or this and these people, and it's like, to be able to hold all of that at once and actually see the nuance, I think is super important. I like work that does the same thing, that it's not just super, straightforward and in your face. It's kind of like there's layers to feeling and energy, because that's kind of true to our human experience.
So do you think why artists are always among the first to be attacked when we enter into kind of times of political, constriction or ideological times, because they disrupt these narratives that try to sort of, box us or control us?
Totally. Yeah, it destroys the whole propaganda machine when you've got artists being like, well, actually, how about this? And we're always, I guess, more sensitive and pick up on a lot that maybe is between the lines or beneath the surface or whatever. So absolutely. I mean, that's why it's like there's the political activists and then there's the artists that are not directly doing anything that shows as being against, but just being able to think critically and hold different perspectives, I think is considered dangerous.
So is art for you an act of resistance?
Yeah, probably. Yes. Yeah, younger me was a little punk girl that was very much the straight down the line of just anti everything. Let's put it that way. And it wasn't until after, like during my first round of university when I was doing design, I was very much in that, activist punk mentality. I was really obsessed with like Adbusters magazine and all this sort of like, I don't know, anti-capitalist, all the things mentality, and the aesthetic that came with that was very loud and aggressive and very, black and white and torn paper and that kind of look. And I had this shift where it was just like, hang on a minute, I'm not actually engaging with anyone. Nothing's going to change. People aren't connecting with this. Like how, like they just see it and they go, ugh, this is, you're trying to push me into something that's not necessarily the belief. So I started, like this wasn't super conscious, but I started doing work, and this is when I started doing really delicate, like almost like children's book illustration style drawing with watercolor and graphite. And it's all very subtle and small on large, fast pieces of white paper. And suddenly, like, people were being more drawn in and responding to this work. And they were, I think, seeing them as some kind of rebellion, but it was a completely different feeling where it was like kind of just opening up and connecting through new ideas as opposed to trying to push them onto people.
So do you think that's a critical point in the journey of an artist when they make the transition from being against something to being for something, but still as an act of rebellion and resistance?
Yeah, I think there's something really nice about this idea that as an artist, you're presenting what is possible, like imagining the better world, imagining what you want to create rather than focusing all your energy on what you don't want and being in the negative. Like if you look at it from the sort of the woo manifestation world, it's like if you're too fixated on the things you don't want, then you're just amplifying and spreading more of what you don't want than what you do want. And I think as artists we can create that alternative perspective or show this utopian, future or whatever it happens to be, and that can be the kind of counterculture in itself.
And you spoke a little bit about you like to work with concepts, so I'm wondering, is there a concept or themes or ideas or questions or through lines that you feel connects all your work, or have you been through different phases?
I mean, I always think I'm going through different phases, and then when I sit with it, I'm like, no, this is about the same thing. It's always the same. And so, I mean, they're pretty broad strokes, like always. It's always this kind of tension between connection and isolation. That's something I always circle back to. In the past, it would be through portraiture, figurative kind of drawings, and now it's these sort of architectural spaces that are essentially resonating a similar thing. But yeah, I think those are the kind of always overarching themes, which are quite broad. But I then pull them into, like, I guess this is where the mythology, the folklore, the kind of depictions of spiritual spaces and things like this kind of ties in somehow. Like I even see the thread with how I work, like with this co-creation thing, it still seems to come in whether I'm doing copper or drawing or AI or collage. It's like there's still some sort of level of play that ties it back together. So I'm not sure, but I think there's a thread.
Why do you think it's so important for artists to be in connection with the history of art and mythology and folklore and all the traditions that they've come from? Because on one level, it would seem like art is about originality and just do whatever comes. But then for so many artists, it's so important to be in conversation with everything that's come before as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think even if we're not consciously connected to it, even if we're not consciously going out and looking at other work or doing like art history or anything like that, I feel like it's so brought through, like whether it's an ancestral thing or whether it's just because it's in the collective consciousness, like we are picking up on things all the time. And I've even found in my practice before I had gone and done my master's, I had done art history through design school and high school and all that sort of stuff. And I'd been to a lot of museums and things like that, but I'd never really sat with a lot of, I don't know, particular works. And then it wouldn't be until I've created something that someone would say, oh, this reminds me of Kiki Smith or whatever. Like so there would be someone that they would see something and I hadn't heard of them yet. And I would then go and see the work and be like, wow, like we're thinking about the same things. And then I feel like knowing that there have been people that have had similar thoughts or felt similar things, like kind of connecting back into their work and understanding how they approached it is quite helpful in the practice itself. I don't think it's like necessarily something you consciously do or that you like have to do, but I feel like it almost just happens organically, that you kind of connect back in. It's like very much part of the process.
Is there a sense of responsibility for you? Like, don't drop the torch that the ancestors lit?
Oh, I like that. I've never thought of it that way, but I like the idea that we're all kind of working together, that it's like it's not just about me and what I'm doing. Like I don't like having so much ego in the art practice. I feel like as artists we're kind of all messengers and kind of channels for something greater than ourselves. And it's like I like handing that responsibility over to the collective.
And can you tell us about what you're working on at the moment? Is there anything you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I literally just started something last week. This morning, I've been reading about, so I've given myself like a little curriculum of learning about spiritual architecture. And I started with, can't remember who wrote it, but I started with The Sacred and the Profane, which I found a bit difficult to read. But I've been circling around on these ideas of like the axis mundi, which is like something that, you know, the connection between heaven and earth and how different cultures across the world have represented this in different ways and in different spiritual practices. And I always circle back into Greek mythology and Greek history. And I was looking at, I guess, Pythagoras, because I'm from Samos, and I always come back into Pythagoras as well. So looking at his representations of this. And then, I don't know, I've just started free drawing this morning based on all these things I've been reading. And I feel like it connects back into this idea of portals and thresholds between worlds that I've been doing with the more architectural kind of drawings. So that's my rabbit hole at the moment, where I'm kind of doing, I don't know if it's going to become, I don't know what it's going to look like yet. I don't know if it's going to become architectural, if it's going to be more, no idea. But at the moment, that's where I'm sketching.
Is there a typical time frame for beginning a piece like that to knowing when it's finished?
Oh, it's so hard to know when something's finished. I never really, I can keep, especially now that I'm with oils, it's like I can keep overworking it till death, and it's like I have to stop. So sometimes it's just calling it and being like, I'm going to stop now. In terms of how long, I mean, if I get in a flow with something, the initial thing can take a few days. Like I can put my initial layers down and my initial thoughts and the composition will be down. But then I will tinker for who knows how long. Depends. Like I have some here that I tinkered on for a whole year, and then I have some that I've done in a weekend. So I'm not a very time-based person. I'm very energy-based. So I think, yeah, it's really hard to measure it.
And do you ever like to go off on retreat to make art? Is there somewhere in the world where you feel more creative, or?
I've never that's a lie. No. I have been in one kind of specific field trip when I was at art school, out to the outback of New South Wales, so sort of 10 hours inland on a train and then another 3 hours into the middle of desert, which was the only time I've done like a specific, like completely disconnected, no internet, no phone, no nothing, 10 days in the outback. And that was an incredible experience because you're just experimenting nonstop with the practice the whole time. And I've never, like, I want to start carving this out for myself, like little sort of mini residencies where I can. The only time that I tend to circle back, I mean, every year I go to Greece, back to where my family's from in Samos, and I do tend to pick up ideas and themes every time I'm there, but it's never conscious. I'm there visiting my family. We're doing big Greek family things. But I'll always have something come through, whether it's from visiting a little chapel to walking through a mountain to noticing something on the side of the road. There'll always be something that comes through in my practice from there.
And, you know, you've spoken a lot about sacred spaces and the sense of your, you know, studio being a ritualistic space. And you mentioned chapels. Was religion part of your childhood at all?
I mean, I technically grew up Greek Orthodox, but in my family and maybe in Greek culture at large, it's very much based on tradition more than religion, I suppose. And a lot of the things that come through in Greek Orthodox religion actually come through from, like, some of the symbols and talismans come through from the sort of original mythological thread of Greek culture. So I find that really fascinating. But I didn't grow up particularly, like, we weren't going outside of big events and weddings, we weren't going to church or anything like that. But I've always been quite captivated by the rituals and practices and really drawn to the whole sensory experience of religion.
And what, you know, I wanted to return to your relationship to color, because I was interested when you were talking about the copper, about, you know, just highlighting those different colors. Like, do you remember where you first started to feel you had this relationship with color?
Yeah, I guess the relationship with color is probably more recent than my relationship with what I would say is like form. Like I remember as a child, like, so I always wanted to be an artist from the age of 6. I think I said the first time I want to be an artist. And I remember as a child, it was not color-based, but it was form-based. And everything I would look at, I would see things that I wanted to draw. So I would look at a tree and I would see figures that I needed to draw, or animals or face. Like there was always something coming through in everything I looked at, whether it be like in some water or a smudge or anything. In terms of color, like color has really come through, like not consciously, but since I've lived in Portugal, color has come through in a massive way. Like before I lived here, it was like my palette was very Australian before, like quite dusty and muted, a lot of like dusty pinks and dusty greens and things like that. And so I didn't really have a conscious understanding of how I was using color until I kind of got here. And then I realized like how much I'm just picking up from my surrounds, how much is just always like I'm always noticing and observing colors intuitively. and how I use color. Like I'm very bad at like studying like the color wheel and how things are meant to complement each other. It's just always been like an intuitive, like this feels like it needs to be with this. And I just play with it. But the bright colors that I've been using in my recent drawings is, I feel like, straight from Portugal. Like you go into Lisbon and you see all the, pastel colored buildings and the jacarandas and the blue of the Tagus. It's like it's always seeping in somewhere. And same with Ediceda and the fog and the dark blues. Oh my God. So yeah, I guess I am color obsessed. I never thought about it.
And so a little while ago on your Substack, you wrote that life is the work of an artist. Can you tell us a bit more about what you meant by that?
Yeah, because I feel like just how you engage with the world is being an artist. That is an artist in practice. I guess this is something that I thought about a lot coming into motherhood, because I had a lot of identity shift where it's like I went from being in the studio all the time to being in denial about the fact that I couldn't have a baby on a warehouse floor anymore. Like it was just not working. And so I really started to unpack it kind of was like a full circle of things where it was like, okay, well, if I'm not actually engaging in the practice that frequently because I'm caring for a small human, am I still an artist? And then it kind of becomes like everything you do and everything with how you engage with the world, how you engage with others can essentially be part of that practice. Like your whole life is creativity. So I don't know, I feel like you can't disconnect from it. I would notice even the way I would compose a plate of food for my daughter would be thinking in terms of form and color and representation in some degree. So, yeah.
So in other words, it's not really a choice, it's just who you are.
I think so. I mean, I don't know if it's the same experience for other artists. I was so resistant to calling myself an artist for so long. But I feel like, yeah, it's just so innately part of like just living. I don't know, I've tried consciously to disconnect from art before. I've tried to reject it completely and been like, I don't want to do this anymore. But it's like it's not possible.
Why have you tried to reject it?
From a practical perspective, it can be a challenging thing to be so dedicated to and committed to. It doesn't always fit into the model of the world at the moment in terms of like the capitalist kind of system of things. You feel compelled to create work, you feel compelled to put things out there and connect with others, but how that works in terms of like making a living and having a home and all these things can be, I'm not saying this is like not a possibility, but I'm just saying there's a disconnect between those two things at times. And so there's been moments where I'm just like, oh, it'd be just so nice to be someone that just goes, you know what, I'm going to be an art director for an agency and I'm going to just do that and be dedicated to that. And as much as I would try, I just can't stop with the art practice. It always needs, it's like, again, to bring it back to the spiritual thing, like for me, it's like if I don't do it, it's like I'm not meditating or I'm not exercising. It's just so part of like keeping a healthy life as a human, in my mind, for everybody. Like that, we should be working out our muscles, we should be working out our creativity. And yeah, for me, it doesn't stop.
That was years ago in London. I interviewed the writer Doris Lessing just after she'd won the Nobel Prize. And she was like, in her mid-80s. And she said, even now, if I don't write every day, I feel like I finish the day and I feel like a bad person.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, yeah. But I related to it, I kind of thought it's, as you say, it's like not eating your vegetables or.
Exactly. And that's it. Like I can go periods. And then I start feeling restless. Like my symptom of not creating is restlessness. And when I was younger, I would like take that restlessness and do something spontaneous or reckless or whatever, and it would be fine. But now, like, when you have like serious responsibilities, I have to be really self-aware and be like, well, why am I feeling restless? Why do I feel like I need to jump on a plane to the other side of the world and do something crazy? And it's like, well, I need to express something. I need to, like, it's like this energy is getting stuck somewhere and I need to let it out, and I need to create that sense of freedom for myself in the practice.
So why do you think so many people resist calling themselves artists as you did? That seems to be an almost universal experience for artistic people.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many preconceptions of what an artist is. And it's like, there's the romanticized side where it's like, oh, you know, we think we're, I don't know, the kind of the side that where it's like they have their muses and they're kind of egocentric and they walk around like, I don't know, there's like this icky perception of them being a little bit skeezy. And then there's the other side, which is all the limiting beliefs, negative side, where it's like, well, if you're an artist, you can't possibly be responsible. You can't possibly be strategic. You can't possibly be capable at the practical things of life. That it's kind of, it's putting you into this like, I don't know, there's like the two sides. It's like the really negative connotations of what that could mean, but there's also the really like pedestal kind of romanticized side. And I always found it, I didn't want to be connected to any of that. I always called myself, like people would ask me what I did and I'd just be like, oh, I draw. Like I would just really just put it down to the exact act. It's only been when I've been able to say to myself, well, an artist can be whatever I want it to be. It doesn't have to latch on to these kind of stereotypes. You know, I can be a mother and an artist. I can be, you know, good with numbers or finance. I can like have these other skills, and actually it's beneficial if I do. And allowing it to sort of be what I want it to be, as opposed to like, I don't know, I feel like that's the hardest part, is actually being like, I can be an artist because I choose to engage with art.
Yeah, it's like I'm allowed to be, or
it's like giving yourself permission. And then there's the other side where it's like people feel like they can't call themselves an artist if they haven't sold their art or have a studio or have a gallery exhibiting them or been to art school. And it's like, my art practice didn't start after I did my master's. It was going for a good 10 years before that. So,
yeah, I think I resisted for a long time because I felt I didn't deserve to call myself an artist. You know, I would like read Samuel Beckett or something. I would like secretly be like, I want to be like him.
yeah.
Then I was like, but I'm not, I never will be.
Yeah, and so
And
this is the pedestal thing, isn't it? You kind of
yeah,
like, they're
yeah.
this like holier figure. But yeah, they're all just, this is why I started writing as well. Like it's kind of, I wanted to be able to kind of debunk all this kind of like mysticism around like who an artist is. It's like, no, we're regular people that wear regular clothes. Like, you know.
It's almost like we also though need like an anointing ceremony where there's like the high priest or priestess of art, and they can go around and anoint you if you like if you want to get your first communion or your confirmation or whatever.
Yeah, we're waiting for permission.
Exactly. But so going back to like 40,000 years ago in the cave when our ancestors were making art with like clay and pigments that they were creating themselves. What's your best guess? Do you think everybody who lived in the cave was an artist, or do you think it was only certain individuals who were channeling this strange thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably different kinds. Like, I think there's probably some people are really interested in documentation and keeping record, and that is still being an artist to some extent. Like, it's another way of being an artist. And then there are others which are probably more, like channeling or representing ideas in a broader mystical sense. And then there's also play. So I feel like all of these things could have been happening alongside each other. But I do think I've been thinking a lot about, and this is probably based on where we live, like we have a lot of space holders in our part of Portugal, where it's like people are consciously holding space for people. And I think in the past, you know, yes, you had your healers and you had the people you would go to for kind of, whether it be like psychological, spiritual healing or physical healing. But then I think you also had artists that were space holders. And I think they created, whether known or not, like it was just a part of, you know, human existence to have either people or people in community doing these things in the same way that they were creating music and they were creating some form of communication. And in the way that they had this access mundi in most traditional cultures, it's like there was something going on, and whether you're conscious of it or not, it was definitely always a part of who we are as humans.
And do you think it's important what intention an artist holds when they're creating or performing or doing what they do in order to channel that energy that you're talking about through the Access Mundi? I mean, do you think if you're cynically just doing something for money purposes, that channel is cut off to you?
I mean, it's hard. It's tricky because I've had that experience where I've been working in my practice for so long that then you're doing commissions and you're doing things like specifically knowing you've got a show and you have to present certain things. And then there's kind of a disconnect between the two things where it's like, okay, if you're creating something that's pure, authentic, I mean, I don't know if you can ever, like, I think you'd have to be a full monk to be able to be pure and authentic completely. But I definitely think it's difficult to create work that resonates well when you're in this place of something that is not truly aligned to what you're supposed to be doing. So maybe some people are meant to be, you know, front and center and seen, and you know, it's meant to be about putting themselves forward. And for them, maybe that is true to them, and I think that is fine. For me, it's like, if I'm trying to create something from this place of, okay, I need to sell X number of works this year so that whatever, then it just doesn't, it gets stuck. It's like it looks forced, like it's missing the point. And I don't know, like I can make it look like I'm creating something that is genuine, but it doesn't feel like it. And it'd be interesting to see if other people can tell the difference or not. But often I find like the works that I do that I consciously am looking at going, oh, this is a mess. What the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? They're often the ones that people are saying to me like, oh, I love that one. I want that one. I want to, you know, we should exhibit that or whatever. And the ones that I'm like thinking consciously are like, yes, this is my good work, tend to not be that interesting.
So finally, can you tell us what's next for you in terms of projects?
Yeah, I think, I don't know yet, but I think I'm going to have an exhibition, like be in a group exhibition in Lisbon in December. It looks like that's coming together. Other than that, it's winter time, so I'm going to be drawing a lot. My plan is to keep playing with scale, go bigger, more work on linen. And I'm going to let it take whatever direction it wants to take. I'm not going to try and, I don't know, I really want to know what I'm doing with it next year, but I don't want to know yet. So I'm going to just let it ride its course and see what happens.
Amazing. So yeah, we'll drop a link to your Instagram and your website in the show notes so people can follow you and hear news about your exhibitions and see your latest work and what you're up to. And thanks so much for an amazing, super stimulating conversation, Kareena. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really nice talking to you.